My name is Kevin and I'm 15 years old. I think it's my fault that I lost my parents. Here's what really happened. 2 years ago, my life was great. My parents were a beautiful couple and they loved me very much. It was like in a movie, a perfect family, a big house, a beautiful life. Then all of a sudden our perfect life came to an end. That evening, my father was coming home from work with a funeral head, disoriented. The company for which he worked all his life had gone bankrupt. My father was unemployed. We had savings, but it was necessary for him to find a new job, a pity that no position offered him as much money and opportunities as his old job. A few months later we had to sell the house and move to a smaller and cheaper apartment. It was the coup de grace for my father. He completely gave up and started drinking. Over time things got worse. My mother worked 24 hours a day and my father spent all the savings on alcohol. One day my mother was exhausted, she couldn't take it anymore and it was their first fight. I remember everything and it was scary. Dad was already drunk that night and my mother's accusations him off a lot. He was furious and started screaming. Well, then he got up and walked up to my mother. I thought he was going to do something horrible and I closed my eyes with fear. All of a sudden he realized what was going to happen and then he started crying. My father needed help and luckily he understood it on his own. The next day my mother took him to the hospital for the detoxification process. After 8 months of hospitalization and sobriety, he finally returns home. My mother always liked her as much and we were ready to forgive her and help her. A few months later, our life began to improve because my father had found a new job and made a little more money. We were very happy even though we no longer lived in a big house, but we were at least the three of us together. We lived like this for 6 months until that night, I woke up thirsty. I went down into the kitchen to get water and strangely my father was sitting in the kitchen in the dark. When he saw me he beckoned me not to make any noise. I turned on the light and then I understood what was going on. He was drinking again. I wanted to tell Mother right away but he begged me not to say anything. He asked me to understand him because he hates his new job, and he doesn't stop thinking about the past, when he could take care of us but today he doesn't find himself. I understood what he meant and I agreed to keep it a secret for the sake of the family. Soon after, I regretted my choice. My mother was coming back from her duty and we were supposed to pick her up at the airport, my father and I. Arriving at the airport, my mother's flight was reported a few hours because of the weather, so we had to wait. I was playing with my phone but I noticed my father's prolonged absence. He hadn't been there for more than half an hour. I got up and I saw him in the parking lot. He had a bottle in his hand and carried it constantly in his mouth. I ran towards him and I told him that the time was wrong but as always, he started to make excuses and said that everything was fine. We could have continued to argue but an announcement indicated that my mother's flight had landed. At that moment, all I wanted was to find my mother. She had brought me a gift. I was so busy unwrapping my gift that I forgot that my father was drunk and that he shouldn't get behind the wheel. On the way back, I kept asking my mother questions. I remember her beautiful smile, then a big snap and a metal noise, all my senses mixed up and I found myself on the side of the road. Then I lost consciousness. I didn't know if it was a dream or a reality. A few hours later a bright light hit me in the face. It was the hospital lamps. I was in a room, looking at my turn and there I saw my father. He was sitting next to the bed and crying. I wanted to tell him to calm down and that everything was fine but he was not crying for me. Then he pulled himself together and told me my mother was dead. I started screaming and crying. It was the worst day of my life. My father could have avoided the accident if he hadn't been drinking. But it doesn't change anything, my mother was already dead. I put up a feeling of hatred towards my father. I didn't talk to him anymore and everyone lived their own way. I was too egoistic that I didn't see my father's suffering. All this made him vulnerable and he started drinking again. It's been a long time since our lives changed. My father blamed me and me on him. The pain was so hard and we didn't get along anymore. One day my father was sober. I jumped at the opportunity to propose to spend the day together between father and son. He agreed and we went to the lake. I was hoping that he would stop drinking and that we could live normally, but again it was a mistake. When we got back, we took a detour to the supermarket and he moved for a moment and handed me his card to finish the shopping. When I got back in the car, he smelled alcohol. I got angry and he started yelling at me and insulting me. He told me to get out of the car, and that's when a police officer intervened and asked my father if everything was fine. So my father changed his attitude and asked me to get in the car to get home. He wanted me not to tell the police anything, but this time I didn't want to make the same mistake again. I immediately thought about the accident and my mother, and then I all threw them at the police. They understood that my father was an alcoholic and that he could not take care of a child. So they decided to put me in a foster home and my father in jail for drunken driving and violence against a minor. It was at this very moment that I realized that I had lost my father forever. I would love to have a second chance to change everything, but it's impossible and I have to live with the rest of my life. Share my story.